Hello and welcome to the Bamboo Chalupa Digital Marketing Podcast. My name is Brett Snyder. I am the president of Knucklepuck, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Nate Shiver, the author of shiverweb.com.
Hello, hello.
So for our regular listeners of Bamboo Chalupa, you'll notice that we really have two unofficial themes that Nate and I try to incorporate into every show. We want our listeners to improve their marketing strategies to become more sustainable and to become more scalable. Now, the inherent contradiction here is that search engines don't like scalable strategies. If something can simply be replicated over and over again to manipulate their algorithm, this doesn't support a unique and independent user experience. It undercuts what the search engines are trying to do if you can scale a strategy that manipulates those rankings. SEOs are notorious for doing exactly that. So on today's episode, we're going to talk about shortcuts and shiny things, why SEOs kill things, and what you can do instead.
Yeah, and so to start off, let's talk about what these shortcuts and shiny things are. And we actually decided on this topic because recently, Rand Fishkin, who's the CEO of the software company Moz, and arguably one of the most influential people in the inbound digital marketing industry, he started a small industry discussion about participating in what are called expert roundups. And this is a tactic that has, I think, become more and more popular over the past year. And basically Rand tweeted out saying that he had just got an email offering a blog post roundup as a service. So basically this is someone who they are outsourcing these efforts for businesses. So they just maintain a giant list and you can pay them whatever, $50 a month, whatever their packages are. And they will send you a prepackaged, pre-written, basically roundup of whatever your size and topic that you want, just for a price. And Rand, who participates in a lot of these SEO expert roundups, he just said that he's done with roundups and that, it's gotten too noisy, is filling up his inbox. And it started up a discussion about, has getting links via these roundups become just a commoditized service? Or is it another one of these tactics that SEOs found, successfully gets links? And so we go and just do it over and over until it's not really worth anything of value.
And what's interesting about that, for anybody who maybe isn't familiar with kind of what a blog roundup is, the idea here is that these people are going to go out there and find various resources within your industry, presumably, and they're going to either pull in kind of a list of articles and pull out specific quotes, or they actually try to connect with these influencers to be able to get new information or something customized to that particular need. The idea here being is that they're going to be giving links out to these influencers who participate, which is supposed to benefit the participant. But they're also going to create this asset that now people will say, hey, you don't need to go anywhere else to, all these disparate sources. You can link to our roundup, which every week you're going to have a prepackaged list of resources relevant to your niche. So when you phrase it that way, it doesn't sound all that bad. And I don't think that was Nate's point here either. I think the issue here... Right. The issue here is the tendency, or rather kind of the true rule that we've adopted over the past couple of years, that SEOs chase these shortcuts and shiny things as short-term tactics just to get the links, the shares, and the visibility. They don't care if that roundup is providing an optimal user experience. They're simply trying to curate resources so that other people will point to them as, hey, these guys got a list of different resources. Now I don't have to do that. At the end of the day, when this starts to get replicated over and over and over and over again, and Google and the other search engines are seeing all the links pointing to your site are from this service that simply has links from other pages, what's the value add? The industry is kind of has this habit of turning these legitimate marketing ideas into parodies of themselves. And by extension of that, we kill these tactics. That is no longer valuable when we have just hundreds of them. Think of these paper.li. If you ever have the expert roundups on Twitter, where if you got your first one, I remember when I first had, started seeing those, I'd go in there, I'd open them, be like, wow, they've included me. And then you realize that it's just a Twitter API that's looking for keywords around a particular niche and automatically pulls in any user that tweets something that meets those criteria. That does not add value. So before we really dive into this, we want to clarify that almost all the tactics and shiny things that we're going to be talking about and a lot of times were good tactics to begin with, and they may still have good, good bones, so to speak, in and of themselves. But in the unconsidered haste and blind execution at scale, which is a phrase that we wrote down before we started the show because I think it sums it up really, really succinctly. So I want to repeat that unconsidered haste and blind execution at scale, the SEOs kill these tactics like locusts on a wheat field. And so we take issue with, we want to take this issue and instead of just ranting about the industry and saying, I used to be able to get links doing this and now those aren't valuable, but actually break the problem down into why this is something that you need to understand with regards to your personal marketing approach and how you are going to be able to, despite the fact that SEOs kill some of the most sustainable tactics, how do you maintain a sustainable approach to your marketing process that allows you to mitigate the risk of these, flash in the pan tactics or even ones that, again, were legitimate but just got beat to death?
Yeah, and I mean, these have been around for a long time, and this tendency I think will be around in the future. It's around right now. I mean, going back through the history of SEO, I remember back when it was the cool thing to be in a certain directories. You had to be in DMOZ. That was like the tactic, and then it moved.
Oh, do you remember Best of the Web?
Best of the Web.
You ever do Best of the Web? The Yahoo directory.
Yeah, there were like key things, and like that was almost part of the sales pitch. We can get you in these directories, and that was the thing. And no one thought about why you should be there. And then you moved into SEO started pitching. Oh, you should have an exact match domain. You should buy a domain that has your keywords. So if you're Brett's Shoe Emporium, you should have instead of being Brett's Emporium, you should definitely buy the Brett Shoe Emporium domain name. We had blog carnivals, which I think we've talked about on a previous episode. In more recent years, people have moved into guest posting, not because, you had because you were going to be a featured columnist on like Forbes or Entrepreneur, but just because you were wanting to guest post for the link. And then we moved into infographics, which I think are probably the best example of a tactic becoming a parody of itself, at least in our industry, while still remaining to be a good tactic in some other industries.
Data visualization is huge.
Oh,
Anytime that you could be able to present something that's a little bit more digestible for an audience, that's a good user experience, regardless of the idea for links. And it still can be. This is one where they haven't completely killed infographics, but I remember, and this was years ago, I remember doing research into infographic directories.
Mm-hmm.
You put out an infographic, I could get you 60 links to that infographic simply by finding sites that will link to other infographics. And that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about kind of the fact that an infographic is a bad tactic or that even guest posting is not something that you should do, but it's a matter of making sure that you're very conscious of how you're executing on these strategies and to ensure that you're maintaining that focus on the user experience.
Yeah, and I think one of the more recent tactics that I think really shows how this happens in the SEO industry is scholarships. Obviously giving scholarships for schools or colleges in your industry, that's been around. That's like a normal big company marketing tactic, or it's not even a marketing tactic. A lot of times it falls under, their corporate responsibility budget. But what happened in the SEO world is that some SEOs discovered, if we give a scholarship for high school students or college students, we could get a link from high schools or colleges. And so what happened was that, SEO firms started manufacturing thin or kind of fake scholarships that they weren't really committed to, but they were really just looking for the link for high school and colleges.
And honestly, there were SEOs that did legitimate scholarships, but they still get,
still are.
They still are, but they still get caught up into this idea of, all right, well, now if you're getting the same links from the same 100 different schools, are these links really making you a better shoe salesman? I think that it's one of those where the tactics aren't completely dead anymore, but the longevity of them, the degree to which they're going to really have a tangible impact on your bottom line is becoming slimmer and slimmer.
Oh yeah, and that goes into other. Just to kind of round out some of the older lists. If you look at widgets or blog network badges, those are something that websites like to have. I mean, even if you look at the SSL or trust badges, I mean, those are still things that have a separate purpose, but a lot of people are still pitching them, to get that little link. But as far as being a tactic that gets links, it's so obvious when they get implemented. You look in the footer, look in the sidebar, does it have a specific link? And it's like, oh, that's not really for this other marketing purpose. It's just for the link.
And, and then we haven't even talked about anchor text. You
Yeah.
talk about taking these legitimate strategies and then say, oh, well, can I have my anchor text in here? And then everybody's like, oh, I can get anchor text with these blog network badges. What if we have multiple links? Hey, can I have a link to my homepage, but also these 3 category pages? I remember developing blog network badges where we had an actual drop down, and it had a legitimate usability benefit to it, where you could go in there and you could say, hey, if you're interested in any of these categories of our products, this will bring you right there. It actually was something that we got a lot of positive feedback in terms of the experience with the badges. That would never fly today, because now they're going to look at that. It's like, it doesn't matter about that user experience. Now this is just, oh, the anchor text is too aggressive, or there's too many of these blog network badges. It's scaling a little bit too much, that this now does not appear to be a legitimate tactic anymore. And that is a result of overdoing it. That's a result of saying, oh, if this is working for 5 links, can it work for 15? Oh, if it works for 15, can it work for 50? Can it work for 100? Can it work for 500? We talk about some of these numbers that may be absurd for, small businesses to consider, getting 500 links from 500 different sites for the same tactic. But you get to some of these larger clients, these larger, campaigns and businesses that are willing to invest considerable time and resources in this. You could get 500 links from a scholarship strategy. Now, what is the value of the 500th link versus the value of the 5th link, the 6th, the 7th? So we start talking about this idea where even though they kill things, it's killing them by scale. It's not killing them because we shouldn't ever do a scholarship again. It's the fact that we are investing so much time into almost artificial or manufactured scale that it's not something that retains those kind of core elements that we need from a legitimate link building tactic.
Oh yeah, but and what's interesting is that, again, this is an ongoing process, and it's not limited to just links. I mean, there's plenty of other shortcut tactics or shiny things that as soon as SEOs hear that, oh, this will get you a rankings boost in Google, they just rush off to adopt it without ever thinking through, oh, okay, is this going to be a good long-term choice for my site?
Right, and some examples of that, HTTPS. Everybody is rushing to HTTPS as soon as Google announced that they were going to give a rankings boost for it. Now, without getting too technical, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a net win for you. We had a client that moved over to that, and their Bing traffic disappeared. They were actually de-indexed by Bing because of the way they use what's called server name indication for processing their HTTPS results. This is something where you rush to, oh, Google said this is going to be a boost, let's run to it. We've seen, I've talked to people who their website has broken. I've seen people where they're not actually able to convert people anymore because it drops off in that conversion funnel.
That's me. I just went SSL on shiverweb.com, and I lost analytics tracking for basically 3 weeks because I didn't realize that by going to relative links, which, not to get into the weeds, but basically that broke all my event tracking, and I had not considered that. And so now I'm missing all this data.
And when you miss that data, you miss the opportunity to make data-driven decisions. Yep. And, we talk about rel author, where everybody rushed to that and it had a benefit. But you could see, and this is what's especially interesting, I think, for the SEO world, is with rel author, you would see people that swear by the increase in traffic they got from the little image showing up in search results. And then you'd read 2 or 3 other resources that say there's actually no causal increase in our rankings of traffic and especially conversions by this little image here. You start to see where Google now takes it out, or they start to moonlight these things. The other thing to consider is that we don't know when Google is devaluing things if they don't announce them. Nate and I were talking before we started this recording about how the era of Matt Cutts is dead. It's kind of gone, where Google search engineers, and we've talked about it on the show as well, don't even understand the algorithm anymore. So there's not even anybody who's able to say, is this working, is this not? It's something that is becoming much more machine learning. And because of that, the quickness through which these kind of strategies can run their course and then become not valuable anymore, that SEOs are killing things much faster than before because the machine learning that Google and the other search engines are starting to employ a lot more heavily is now identifying these scaled tactics much quicker, and from there being able to devalue or potentially even kind of remove some of the links that would be pointing back to your site.
Oh yeah. Well, let's go and talk about why this matters. Why not blindly chasing these shining things matters. And I think, Brett, you've already touched on what I think is the most important point, and that is priorities and resources. So bad tactics and just chasing shiny things, it can waste the finite amount of time, resources, money that you have, especially, when you talk about scaling things and when does the marginal benefit start to go below the marginal cost. And unless you have the resources to be an early adopter for early adopter's sake, I think about, cutting edge SEO firms who, they implement HTTPS right off because they have developer resources and they want to be able to say, hey, we're cutting edge, that kind of thing. A lot of times shiny things will waste that valuable time and money that you could devote to things that are sustainable, that are working. I think about, using copywriters who, if you're trying to choose developing out your on-page content or sending out 10 guest posts to get 10 links from kind of lower quality sites, that's a definite choice you have to make. And if you've heard that, guest posting is a quick and easy way to get links, you have to be able to balance that with creating on-page content that will work. It might be a little more boring, but it's more sustainable. And chasing those shiny things is going to divert that kind of priority.
And I think what's interesting also is that we do not live in a black and white world when it comes to the successes or failures of our tactics. 10 guest post links may not be as valuable as one editorial link. We start focusing too narrowly on the quantity of links and not really considering the fact that the quality of these links has a real tangible impact on the value that it's going to drive for our SEO campaigns. People start to look at these shiny things, say, oh, well, more links, this is the direction that I'm going to go, without really thinking critically about how valuable those links really are going to be. We have to talk about priorities here because we have to talk about what is the expected impact. It's something that we've talked about on the show a number of times before. It's something that I know is, you heard Nate talk about how bad it is to lose 3 weeks of event tracking on the website, because how do you make decisions in terms of which content is performing the best? How do you make decisions in terms of what to write next? You're not armed with the same information to be able to make informed decisions here. And so when you aren't using the available information through data, through, actual trial and error, through validated learning, you're not able to establish priorities that are based in any sort of, concrete formula. You're simply saying, oh, this is going to give me more links, or, ooh, this is new and exciting, I'm going to do that.
And I think that goes into the second reason that chasing shiny things matters, and that's that it can actually have a tangible negative penalty on your business if you get this narrow focus and start chasing things, chasing links, chasing keywords just for keywords or links' sake. These bad tactics can get you into trouble. Google in 2010, 2011, 2012, and even ongoing to now, Google has separate algorithms, the Panda and Penguin, that specifically look at abuses of these signals. And so, they're looking for bad links and they're looking for just very thin keyword stuff content. And Google will actively penalize you. The web spam team also has manual penalties that when they come across a site that is doing things specifically to manipulate Google's current algorithm rather than creating value for Google's users who are looking for things through their search engine, they'll submit a manual penalty or de-index you. And then, there's other penalties that come from simply providing a bad user experience for your customers. And if they start to see things that don't align with your brand, that can be a penalty for, your long-term brand image.
And we have to talk a little bit about the kind of subtle distinction here between devaluing a tactic and actually penalizing a tactic. And I think they start to devalue before they'll penalize. But think about it this way, where infographics, for example, used to be a major tactic, or scholarships. Let's go back to the scholarship example. Used to be a major tactic. Google now sees that people are just offering $500 scholarships because they know that here's a list of links. They go and they crawl the backlinks of XYZ agency that they know employs this tactic. Said, all right, we found all these scholarship pages. Let's get our link up there. You're starting to see this kind of scaled across, and it's adding less value to the end user there. And so Google will start at, kind of their first response is to devalue these tactics, to say, all right, we're not going to penalize you for it, but this is just not going to add anything to you. This is not going to give you any sort of a boost. We are going to essentially exclude these links and, create our evaluation of your domain based on, the other links and the other signals you have pointing to your site, the other content. Now, when we talk about penalties is where things start to get really egregious, where you start to say, all right, well, now this isn't just scholarship links where we got 40, 50 links here. We got 750 links from a scholarship strategy. We have all these links that are pointing to one particular page. Or we see a widget strategy on different sites that is all in sponsored. So we know that these are paid links that is specifically forbidden through Google's guidelines. This is where we talk about the idea of scale and how scale can kill these things, because it can happen before you know it. Even if the strategy started as a legitimate tactic, it can kill this, if you try to do it too aggressively, too quickly. Again, guest posting. You give me the opportunity to guest post on the New York Times or even on Forbes, I'm going to take the opportunity to do that because that is a reputable source that they know that Google understands that they actually curate their authors, and that a link from there, even if it is a guest post, is something that is going to be able to help my brand. It's going to help me communicate with my users in a forum that I know that means something to them. Now, if we take that same strategy and say, okay, cool, I wrote this post for Forbes, find me 499 other places that will submit or accept guest posts, and then just go and essentially try to syndicate this content out to all of those. Oh, these few of them want payment? Sure, for the top 200, I'm willing to pay X amount of money for that. So now you start bleeding into what Google's looking at as a negative tactic, as something that is actually manipulating the search results. And instead of excluding links that they deem to be, hey, this was just a guest post, this was something that they did this, to get links, but it still is adding value. Now we're going into a position where we say, all right, they're actually trying to abuse our algorithm by pushing out this same content to 500 different resources. That's where you start talking about these panda and these penguin penalties.
And just to round this out, the last reason this really matters is perception, not just of the company that is implementing these tactics, but also SEO and marketers as a whole. We live in a world where SEOs actually end up debating about whether or not to call their industry quote unquote, SEO, because it has such a bad name because of these tactics, because of the locust-like behavior of seizing on one tactic to get links. And you end up spamming a lot of potential customers, a lot of potential businesses. And honestly, it's really hard to move up the value chain at a growing business if the best thing that you can pitch to their marketing team is we should do an infographic because it gets links. And I know a lot of this is kind of semantics and phrasing, but I think that the phrasing and the intent behind the tactic matters a lot, because that's what differentiates, in a lot of industries, that's what differentiates these individual tactics, just to get the sale or just to get this one short-term objective into something that you can do long-term, something you can actually build a business around.
And what it really boils down to is, are we improving our digital communities with these resources, with these tactics that we're employing? Are we giving users, and by extension the search engines, valuable signals that reinforce our trust, authority, and relevance? At the end of the day, that's what Google's trying to accomplish. That's their goal. Their goal is to organize the world's information. Are these tactics supporting that goal? Are we creating these resources to be able to help organize the world's information and improve the user experience of our target community? Or are we simply putting these out saying, I don't care if people click on it. I don't care if people engage with it. I just want the links. And so it comes down to, how are people going to start engaging with these resources? Does the resource itself generate links? You talk about this idea of second tier link building. where if I have an infographic that, I publish on somebody else's site, or a guest post, we can go back to that example. If a guest post is on somebody else's site and that guest post generates links, that's showing that it's much more valuable. It doesn't matter if you're a regular writer for that source. Google sees additional signals that reinforce that this is a valuable piece of content. And so the kind of the bottom line focus here is that these resources need to improve our community. They need to provide additional resources, additional information to our community that elevates kind of where they are, without that resource. It's not about the links. It's about what type of contribution can we make. And that's where Google and Yahoo and Bing have just these massively complex algorithms, because they can understand user value. That's the thing that we're starting to talk about using machine learning much more aggressively in these search engines. But at the end of the day, they're being able to evaluate web content in a way that is just vastly different than anything that we've seen before, because now they're able to infer user intent rather than simply inferring keyword focus.
All right. Well, let's talk about how to take all these tactics and do them well, to do them better, to make them into the tactics that they were originally supposed to be. And I would say first is to heavily customize and personalize your tactics based on the persona or the type of person that you're trying to reach. What do you want the tactic to achieve? Are you trying to get links to your website? Are you trying to get shares? Who are you trying to get in front of? Are you trying to get in front of customers who will buy the product? Or are you trying to get in front of webmasters or journalists who will write about the product or link to the product to get it in front of your customers? How does this tactic improve the brand experience for your persona? Would you be embarrassed if someone saw an infographic that had your watermark floating around the web? Or just, in other words, how are you adding value and making the web, a better place? And I think that's the rule of thumb that a lot of marketers skip over, just in their relentless pursuit of scale and getting more and more of whatever they're trying to get more of. And I think it comes down to, a lot of marketers don't want to do this because it's hard. And it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of resources, because customization, by definition, doesn't scale.
Yeah, and we have a saying at Knucklepuck that, no project has a template. We don't run projects off templates, but every project has a defined process. This is essentially a means for us to use our resources most efficiently, while still understanding that our success is going to be driven based on how we execute on a defined process. For example, we have a specific process for competitive backlink analysis to identify what is working for target queries or a target industry, so that we know what types of signals we want to go out there and curate. We have a specific process for content gap analysis to understand what type of content we need to add to our site to provide a more legitimate value add for our users. We have a specific process for SERP analysis, for keyword research, content planning, technical audits, and link outreach. But these processes are applied very differently to every client based on the audience personas we're targeting. The point of these processes are to allow us to identify the focus of our tactics. Remember, tactics are not strategies. There's a difference between strategies and tactics. Tactics are the actual tools, the steps that you're going to take. Strategies are the overarching goal that we're trying to accomplish here. And so we apply our process differently to every client. We adapt to every client, but the process of being able to identify what Google and Yahoo and Bing are valuing for a particular query, and how does that translate into the specific actions we need to take to be able to establish optimal visibility for those queries, that's the part that doesn't quite scale in the way that we're talking about from a just almost of a software perspective, where you implement a process and it just runs on autopilot. You have to have this framework, but within the framework, there needs to be individual tactics defined based around that framework.
Second, say that you have to customize your tactics based on the industry that you're in. So one of the benefits of being a consultant or working with a consultant is that the consultant gets to see what is working in one industry, and then they can come over and reapply it in this other industry. And a lot of times that works. In fact, I would say that's one of the big benefits of working with an agency or a consultant. The problem on the consultant or agency side is that a lot of times things can get lost in translation. And, if you see that infographics, are working really well in the do-it-yourself industry, and you think, oh my word, I have this engineering firm that, if I move it over and if the engineering firm does an infographic, it's going to do just as well as it does in the do-it-yourself industry. Well, a lot of times that'll work, but it's really important to take industry considerations into and apply them to the tactic, so you take the core, the essentials of the tactic, and then you put it in the right form, so that, maybe one industry's infographic is another industry's, data visualization with an interactive tool, so that you have the core of taking something complex, making it simple, but it's going to be something slightly different that will work across industries.
Yeah, this is honestly the reason why I started Knuckle Puck in the first place, and the reason why I've spent my entire career on the agency side. Agency work affords a level of exposure that provides insights about the efficacy of certain tactics that a single client focus simply cannot provide. You want to have a more complete understanding of the web. SEOs, by definition, are trying to optimize for a search engine placement. Now, we can talk about individual keywords. We can talk about different sections of your website and different landing pages. We could talk about large corporate entities that have multiple websites. How are you going in there and actually establishing rankings for each one of these web assets? You have to understand where the overlap is. You have to understand what are the consistent signals that we know search engines are valuing. I mean, we could talk about title tags as one of the most basic tactics available to an SEO. The first thing that you should do is optimize your title tags. Any SEO that's been doing this more than 2 weeks knows that. It's still something where, that was defined because people started to see over and over and over again, as I improve my title tags, my rankings improved. This is something where the SEO community as a whole has grown based on this ongoing research people are conducting. And so it allows us to evolve our strategies as necessary, having that exposure. So, for example, we have a client whose primary audience segment is adolescents. To engage these users and provide them with an optimal experience, we took our old scholarship link building list and used it to identify guidance counselors at these various high schools. Then if we could connect with the guidance counselors to understand the types of resources that would best serve their students, we can develop our assets accordingly. We're able to evolve something that was simply, hey, here's a list of schools that we can use to get scholarship links, to say, here's a list of schools that likely have resources that are intimately connected with our ultimate target audience. How do we engage with all these different audience personas, as we talked about earlier, to understand that where do we invest our resources in producing content or producing these web assets? Again, the idea here is not just to get links. That is what we want from something that we can tangibly point to that's going to impact our rankings. But at the end of the day, our agency kind of experience here gave us the understanding that using a scholarship link, using that foundation and applying it when we know there's an overlap in audience, that there's an overlap in user intent, that's what gives us the opportunity to scale efficiently. And again, not try to just do these, set it and forget it approaches, but actually see how we can use what we've already learned about an audience or a user persona segment and then apply that to complementary segments in the future.
I love that. I love the concept of overlapping things and how you can go after the whole thing of both killing two birds with one stone. But
Absolutely.
And the last thing that you can do to take these tactics and make them good is to know thyself, or customize tactics based on your business. So it's really important to understand what your business can and can't do. And this is a lot more difficult than a lot of businesses will admit to, because you're probably not going to like the results, but you have to be objective. This means that you may see a giant opportunity for, thought leadership or doing a write-up in the New York Times or some sort of design. But if you can't do it, you can't do that. And that will sort of delete this menu of choices that you have and force you to solo into something that you can actually do. And, this is something where you can consider bringing in an outside resource to help you get that perspective. But it's a very, very important process to go through so that you can customize the tactics based on what you can or can't do.
That's actually one of the first things that we do with our new projects at Knuckle Puck. people who have taken business or marketing classes in the past will be familiar with this idea of a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Typical application of a SWOT analysis is essentially deciding whether or not to pursue a particular tactic or strategy. It's basically a way to try to boil down to objective criteria whether or not this is worth pursuing. Now, we took kind of that framework, at least, that strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and actually applied it to our projects as a whole. This is not designing whether or not that we should take the project. This is not whether or not that we should, do a certain tactic or strategy, but we look at this for all of our projects and say, all right, let's identify the strengths of this brand. Let's identify where they're strongest. Let's identify the weaknesses of this brand. What are our opportunities from a marketing perspective to be able to go out there and create more exposure? And then what are the threats? What are the things that may inhibit our ability to go out there and actually push these clients and create legitimate and authentic engagement with their target audience? So again, this is a little bit different SWOT analysis where the ultimate goal is not yes or no, should we pursue this? The idea is to understand everything from both sides, the positives and the negatives about our position in the marketplace, so that we can craft our strategies to address, or to leverage the strengths and opportunities, and also to proactively address our weaknesses and threats, so that we know when we actually get into the execution standpoint that our resources are going to be used efficiently.
Oh yeah, and that's obviously because the different tactics that you're going to use are going to need different resources, and you're not necessarily going to be able to do everything yourself, or at least not as well as if you have a dedicated resource, someone who knows how to do that one thing. But this doesn't mean that you have to go out and hire a full service agency with designers, developers, user experience specialists, all that kind of thing. But you should consider the level of detail that is going to be required to execute many of these strategies, and how they're going to require sort of a more rounded team.
And so what do you do here if you are a single person team? What do you do if you don't have a well-rounded team of resources at your disposal? The challenge here then becomes education. You need to stay educated. You need to learn from what other people are doing and have done. You need to try to internalize this well-rounded approach by taking advantage of many of the free resources that are out there on the web. Nate and I have talked about this before, both on the show and in personal conversations, where one of the biggest draws of the SEO industry for both of us was the fact that it is very it's very self-sustaining. It's something where people write about tactics that work because it allows the industry as a whole to thrive. People write about tactics that work so they can get links from people who are interested in those tactics. Make sure you have clear expectations for the success of your campaign, and that you check in as you're executing that strategy so that you're tracking correctly towards those goals. Make sure you extend your timeline for getting things done. Any of these strategies are always going to take longer than you think. It's one of the biggest faults of my own that I'm actually consciously trying to work on is being overly ambitious in terms of how quickly or how successful we can do things within a certain timeline. It is going to take longer than you think to drive these successes, but the idea, again, with SEO is that these are sustainable results. These are ones that are going to live on into the future and allow you to take advantage of this for years to come. You also want to build in time to see the results of your work and determine if a change is needed. At the end of the day, you need to remember that your tactics will come and go, but our directive remains the same. And that's to curate signals that demonstrate to users and to search engines that you are a trustworthy, authoritative, and relevant resource that provides a legitimate value add to your target community. When you understand that directive and you evolve your tactics accordingly using principles like validated learning from the lean startup that we've talked about before, that you talk about these regular check-ins, having established KPIs, making sure that you have clean and veritable data that you can tie back to have objective decisions about whether or not something is working. As long as you understand this kind of core directive and you evolve your tactics accordingly, you are going to be able to be successful for both scalable and sustainable strategies without getting into the all too common SEOs kill things kind of bucket that we've been warning you guys against for the past 35 minutes.
All right. Well, you can find previous episodes, links to all the things that we mentioned, and our contact information at bamboochalupa.com. If you don't want to miss another episode, go subscribe to the podcast in iTunes or your favorite podcast app. And while you're there, please do leave a comment and rating. We learn a lot from your feedback, and those ratings and reviews helps others to discover the show. So for Brett Snyder, I am Nate Shiver. Thank you for listening.